Now I will switch to English to introduce our next speaker here today, who, if any of you ever wonder, like Margrethe Vestager, would it be nice to pull the plug on this AI one day if it wants to take over the planet or destroy everyone? Don't worry about that. Worries like that are silly, he thinks. And I think that's quite reassuring, because this guy really knows what he's talking about. He is an expert in machine learning. He's a professor of computer science. He spent years in Silicon Valley, started numerous businesses, and he now leads the Pioneer Center for Artificial Intelligence in Copenhagen. And he's here to advise you how to look a bit, perhaps more cool-headedly on artificial intelligence and how to make most of it in your businesses. So please welcome Serge Belongi.
So I think I'm the last speaker before lunch, so I will try to keep this interesting so you don't resent me. So the theme here, as you heard in the introduction, is demystification. So I want us, of course, to appreciate the incredible power of the recent advances in AI, but also understand the hype and the things that have perhaps been over-exaggerated. I want to start with something called the ELIZA effect, which goes back decades. And I don't know how many here have heard of it, but back in the 60s at MIT, there was a very rudimentary chatbot called ELIZA. And by modern standards, it was so simple. It really just spoke like a bored therapist. You would type things into the keyboard, and it would say things like, how did that make you feel? What do you think about this? What do you do next? And it turns out that people were very quick to anthropomorphize these chatbots. This isn't the case with other modalities of avatars for some reason, right? Psychologists understand this better. But among these different modalities like speech and a video representation of a person, it's not quite the same, but the text chatbot makes people lose their goddamn minds. I don't know what it is. But it goes back to the 60s, and these chatbots have gone through ups and downs. Sometimes they get smarter, sometimes they get dumb. But the thing is that a lot of AI researchers are looking at the press right now, at the breathless excitement of the science press and the popular press, and they're saying, wow, it's so hyped. And what I would say is the people to blame are ourselves, the AI researchers. And the reason for that is during all those decades when this stuff didn't work at all, before the deep learning revolution, before the generative AI revolution, we used to use anthropomorphized terms to describe the AI methods. Because we figured, well, it's so far from ever being useful, where's the harm in doing that? Well, of course, the science fiction authors were paying attention, the journalists were paying attention, and now we see those problems. So let's take a moment, without any equations, let's just look at what's actually happening in these big models. Whether we're talking about text, images, video, sound, it doesn't matter. The first thing that happens with all of these big generative AI methods is tokenization. You have to take whatever you have and break it into these little parts. This got its start from Google research with text. It's the simplest modality to tokenize. In that case, the tokens are just words. So what do you do to power these systems? Well, you take very large bodies of text, in this case, and you use something called masking. Specifically, you use a masked autoencoder. So you take this big body of text, and you move through the entire document, and you delete a word, and you train a massive neural network to fill back in the word that you removed. So you just step through one token at a time. So here you have a sentence. How are, the word was you get rid of it, and you train this enormous neural network to figure out what was the thing that you masked out. If you do this in the context of images, the tokens are little tiles. You go through the image, you remove a little square of the image, and you coerce an ever-increasingly sized neural network to paint back in the thing that you miss. Right? This is what's happening with ever-growing context windows. Like, how much do you look at in order to figure out what to fill in? It's getting faster with more GPUs from companies like NVIDIA. But at the root of it is this problem called representation learning, where you're basically beating a neural network over the head to get it to fill in the thing that's missing. Now, what I want you to appreciate about this is that, yes, these representations lead to some fairly impressive results, like image synthesis, like human-like chatbots, but they are not intelligent. They are not sentient. They are not even smart. It is just math. They are high-dimensional vectors, okay? So yes, they are impressive, but it's still just math. Another thing to remember, which I'll refer to as the golden rule of machine learning, is that you must keep your training data separate from your testing data. So what do I mean by this? So as generative AI has gotten more popular, there are a whole bunch of so-called AI influencers who go on social media and they talk about it in hyperbolic ways. So the kind of thing that you might see is this example on the left, which is called the Chihuahua versus blueberry problem. So here you've got a 4x4 grid, and the challenge is to go through quickly and identify, is it a blueberry muffin or is it a Chihuahua? So at some point, somebody, one of the AI influencers, presented this to a version of ChatGPT that can look at images, and they said, look, it got them all correct. And it went viral. Everybody's sharing that thread. Now, the nerdy AI professors like myself look at this and say, wait a minute, that's probably in the training set, right? OpenAI crawled a large part of the internet, and they probably have that exact example and a lot of discussion about it. That it's like looking at the answer key of an exam before you take it, right? But it was too late because there was already, it was getting shared everywhere. And the fact is, we just don't know. Was it in the training set? Was it not? Same kind of thing when it comes to explaining humor. Someone can type in a joke and say, look, ChatGPT explained the joke to me. But was that joke already there? Who can say? OpenAI doesn't tell you what's in the data set. So it could be remarkable, but it also could be complete garbage. So the thing we need to remember when you get into the real world, at startups, at SMEs, and beyond, the real world is fine-grained. The devil is in the details. These kinds of gimmicks don't get you very far. You really have to tackle the individual problems within different domains. And in that respect, I want one of the take-home messages here to be that you won't lose your job to AI, but you may lose your job to someone who is trained in AI. So I also want to put a big focus on the data and also think a little bit about the cultural specificity. So I picked a couple examples, one from the US and one from Denmark. So the one from the US involves parking. And here you have an example of a pretty complicated parking sign. So, and this is typical, all right? So the question here is, can I park here? All right? Now, this isn't actually a very deep AI problem. It's actually more of a municipality problem, a constraint satisfaction problem. The only real AI here is the optical character recognition. So here's another example where an AI influencer took this example and said, look, you don't even have to read that thing. You just ask ChatGPT, can I park here for the next hour? And it answers, yes, you can. All right? Turns out it was wrong, but it's very compelling. It's kind of exciting, and people share this. But meanwhile, in this case, I think a lot of attorneys are wondering, what are the ramifications of this? Who's responsible for that if it goes wrong? But now let's take another example, a beloved app among parents with kids in school. And so raise your hand if you're the parent that uses Aula. So here, assuming, I assume everybody knows this, this is the app for communicating between teachers and parents and students in a school context. So this is something where if you just read all of the hype about generative AI going back, say, 6 months ago, you would think, well, we can just train an AI assistant on Aula data, and we don't even have to look at it. It'll just tell us what your kid has to bring to school tomorrow, right? When is the next birthday party or whatever. But again, it isn't really the AI that is the challenge here. This is a societal problem. We can't blame the app. You can't blame, it's really ourselves that are the problem, right? And the opportunity. So when things arrive in Aula, they could be in a lot of different places. They could be in Biskilla. They could be in Kalenda. They could be in Uenoda. They could be in Overblik, right? It could be in a note in the backpack that the kid brings home, right? So the thing is, if you want an AI system that could answer a question like, what do I need the kid to bring to school tomorrow, right? What's happening next week? It turns out that at the Pioneer Center, we tried some experiments with some local models to train on this data. It is extremely hard to solve this problem. It's not just a matter of pre-training and fine-tuning. These are very difficult problems in terms of understanding the relative importance of these different subdomains that affect parents and teachers and so forth. So the thing I really want to emphasize here again is it comes back to the data. You have to have, you need proper stewardship for the data. And we have experience with this in the context of biodiversity. It's in fact one of the reasons why I moved to Denmark, is that this is the home of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So in a different domain that has to do with recognition of plants, animals, fungi, and so on, some of you may be familiar with an app called Merlin Bird ID or iNaturalist. And these efforts are rooted in the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. They push their occurrence data to this repository that is headquartered in Copenhagen. And this provides opportunities for a public-private partnership with all of this data that is collected around the world, and companies such as Google that are able to train models on this, but do it in a responsible way. So there are these precedents which are actually rooted in Europe for proper use of data, allowing for takeout by people who don't want the data used anymore, version updating, and so forth. And this is something we could get into in the Q&A session, but I see hope in these types of models that we've set up in different domains, in that case biodiversity, and these are the kinds of things that we can do in all these different fine-grained categories with these powerful AI models. The other thing I want to remind us of, and these are tiny fonts, don't worry about reading it, we have to remember the previous waves of hype and the previous kinds of disruption that have occurred. And many people in this room have lived through several of these. So if you take, for example, the spreadsheet, so when VisiCalc came out, the predecessor of Excel, that was something around 1979, 1980, and it was massively disruptful, right? So when that happened, it took away power from programmers. It was a kind of no-code movement where small and medium enterprises could just do their own accounting using spreadsheets. And if you look at government records, massive amounts of jobs were lost in accounting clerks, the secretarial aspects of, or the data entry parts of accounting. But then suddenly, all of these enterprises are using spreadsheets, and then they're able to run models all the time and figure out, oh, now I need more accountants, and there's a different wave of technology disruption that happens. The point is, the history is there for all these previous patterns of disruption, and we just need to study it and say, what is it that's different this time about AI? So I will wrap up here. I didn't say much about the Pioneer Center for AI. You heard that's where I work in the introduction. But this is something that's relatively new. It's just 3 years old at this point. Many of you here are already affiliates of it. But this Pioneer Center for AI is what we make it. And I'm very interested in meeting many of you this afternoon. I'm happy to talk more about what the Pioneer Center for AI is doing. But there's an affiliation link here where you can learn more about what we're doing. So I will stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Wow. And questions have already come in, more to come, I hope. But let's finish off with the Pioneering Center. 3 years, you say. What would you say is the most interesting thing for people in this room that you are working on?
So I think the most interesting thing are the Pioneer Center moonshots. So if you look at the Pioneer Center on a day-to-day basis, what you're going to see, of course, are the different areas of AI pursued, like natural language processing, computer vision, brain-computer interfaces, and so on. So that's kind of the ordinary vanilla work that's happening. But what's really transmitting the vision of our center are our moonshots, which are the result of a co-creation process with all of the co-leads. These involve things like stopping misinformation in social media, right? Creating fair medicine for all people. So these are gigantic decade-plus moonshots. Most of them are impossible, but it's okay. So I think that's really an interesting way to engage with the center. Talk to us about the moonshots, figure out what we're doing to try to get there.
We hope some of them are possible,
yeah.
I'll say. There's a question here about equality of AI responses. How do we ensure quality when large language models are trained primarily on AI-generated materials?
So this goes back to this thing I'm talking about with long tail and fine-grained. So let's caricature a little bit the difference between Silicon Valley and Europe. In Silicon Valley, or let's say that the American approach to machine learning is very much about a holy grail of one big model that will rule them all. So a gigantic model that just crawls all of human knowledge and just understands everything. So I am not a proponent of this. I'm not a proponent of artificial general intelligence. I'm a proponent of artificial narrow intelligence that is coordinated, that we can study. And one of the nice things about artificial narrow intelligence is that you can talk about human community backing of all of these different fine-grained areas, like the functions of a municipality, something as mundane as waste sorting, the app Aula, the communicate, all of these things require human communities behind them who understand the little nuances. And in that respect, I don't put the AI functionality on the podium out in front. It's not about the big model. It's really fancy autocomplete that allows you to retrieve the information that you need. What's important is the curation of the data and knowing that there are people behind it who are responsible for what goes into it.
Right. Now, the theme of today is AI and leadership.
Yeah.
You yourself are a leader. You've been a business leader as well. What would you say is the role of leaders in this process that our societies are going through?
So one thing I would say, I want to go back to those patterns of disruption. And I would say the coffee table reading or the train commute reading, some kind of background reading that the leaders need to do is to study some of those patterns of disruption. What happened when Google was released? It used to be that Yahoo was dominant, right, starting from '95. When Google search rolled out, it sent shockwaves through high schools, through university education, the paralegal profession. Suddenly you're just typing stuff into Google and getting answers, right? To take all of these cases, look back at the way that the media talked about it, see how it impacted the statistics of jobs that were lost and jobs that got added. Try to just calm down and say, these kinds of patterns happen every time, right? What's interesting is the delta. Look at the difference between these different waves of innovation. So I would say that the most important thing is studying the historical patterns and then zeroing in on what makes this wave different. And I would also say, strongly encourage your employees to try these systems. Whatever the monthly subscriptions are, whatever you need, not just Microsoft, not just Google, just encourage employees to try it because they will see the power and they will also see how stupid it is. And that will help calm people down a little bit.
Do you think people are overreacting?
some people are overreacting, but I would say it fits the usual pattern, going back to Sputnik, going back to the telegraph connecting the UK to New York, right? It just took 2 weeks after the telegraph cables were laid before the first misinformation was sent, before the first porn got posted somewhere, right? So the patterns are repeating over and over, and as leaders, we must study that and also appreciate what's different about it this time.
We spoke earlier about Europe and the US,
Yeah.
and Europe lacking behind on innovation, on technological large companies, and so forth. Do you, on behalf of Europe and thereby Denmark, fear for the future of Europe in this AI competitive world we're entering?
So I speak from the perspective of an academic, a professor situated in a university, and in that sphere, I am very confident that Europe is really strong. The AI research labs in Denmark, Scandinavia, across Europe are incredibly strong. So that aspect, the academic part, the capacity building that's occurring at a global scale in terms of who's going to the big influential companies, that part I'm very excited and optimistic about. I can't speak with authority about what's happening outside of that, but what I do know is that a lot of entrepreneurs that are getting seed funding and doing super cool things with their startups, they get to that Series A round, they're about to get bigger, and then they go to California, they go to New York, they go to the UK, and it's a very complex landscape. There's many reasons why they do that. And it's not for work-life balance, right? They're not going to Silicon Valley to have a lot of vacations. So there's something complicated there, but again, in terms of my role, I see my role as global. I'm leading an AI research center in Europe with a global perspective. And some researchers, some entrepreneurs, and so on, they're going to thrive in very different environments. And at minimum, I want those brilliant minds to pass through the Pioneer Center at some point.
I hope for you that they do, and for us. I introduced you saying that you thought all these catastrophic thoughts about AI taking over the world were a bit silly, I think was the word I used. Someone wants to know, is there nothing at all about AI that worries you?
The things that I worry about in AI are just amplifications of what worries me about people. So it isn't the AI, it's something it's a case of people, it's like AI researchers are pointing at the moon and people are looking at their finger, right? It is not the AI that is the problem. If you think of AI as a fancy retrieval engine or some kind of lookup mechanism that can stitch things together, you realize it's just amplifying what people are already doing. It amplifies bias and so on. But the problem, what's different about when it was Google or when it was the mobile web putting the whole internet in your hand 24/7, is that people are anthropomorphizing it now. They impute intelligence to this, and that's the part that's dangerous. They're talking about, like, here's a pissing contest between these different chatbots and which one has the best or worst score on misinformation. What are you talking about? Why would you expect? You're treating them as if they are reporters or something, right? This is insanity, but it goes back to this idea that they have been anthropomorphized. So that is just the idiot wind that is just blowing through this whole conversation. And it will settle down and become much more mundane. But right now, it is a struggle for serious academics to navigate this.
And speaking of that, Margrethe Vestager spoke about her worry being that maybe we will lose trust in technology and in the answers that AI comes up with. How do you see trust and AI go together hand in hand as we move forward?
So there's a part of this where I'm actively working to make a difference, and then there's a part that is just aspirational. It's wishful thinking. The part where I'm working to make a difference is at a Nordic scale to pursue AI research in the way that I described, where we build on a foundation of trust in institutions. So the Nordic region is different. It is a place that you can go and study AI and proper data management, and there's a relatively high level of trust in institutions. That means you can credibly work on problems that involve the public sector and public-private partnerships with powerful AI methods, and the population will have reason to believe that it is in their best interest. So this is something I'm working together with Sweden and Norway to develop those kinds of methods. And I think playing a long game, the rest of the world will pay attention. That's the part where I'm doing something. The aspirational part is that when the dust settles, and everybody has tried these generative AI search engines that supposedly just give you a paragraph answer, eventually they're going to realize this is hot garbage, because they're going to need primary citations. They're going to need links. They need to back it up with information, which is going to bring us back to the good old-fashioned Google list of results, because how will you ever trust that summary? There are so many interests going into that with Microsoft, with Google, with OpenAI. So I think that we're in this weird period where people think it's a foregone conclusion that Google is Stone Age and no one wants to look at these links anymore. And I think that that will not last. I think we will go back to some version of that. So that's the aspirational part. But my hope is that when the dust settles, they'll say, oh, look at what the Nordic AI researchers were doing while we were so confused. And then we charge ahead.
Thank you, Serge. I think that's a perfect place to stop. So give Serge a hand. Thank you so much for coming.
Great. Thank you.
Sydbank. Danmarks Erhvervsbank.